wonderful news about Asia is that the Asia Pacific region, Region 3, group of regulators have decided on a specific ban plan within this region and has already made the recommendation to the ITU. The specific recommendation is really for a 2 times 45 megahertz split, uplink, downlink, with a 10 megahertz duplex gap in between.
Sorry, how much megahertz?
Here, let me,
I know what the gap is, but I didn't catch what you...
2 times 45 megahertz.
Okay.
And the beautiful part, it starts at 698 all the way up to 806. And just to give you a little bit of detail, there's a 3 megahertz guard band first, followed by a 3 megahertz guard band on the high side.
Okay.
And then in between here, there's a 10 megahertz guard band, duplex gap. Here, I'll draw this for you, so that way you'll have it. Guard band. And the beautiful part is, here in Asia, 45 megahertz, 45 megahertz. That's what it looks like.
All right.
So Asia has already at least decided on a recommended ban plan for all of the countries here in Asia. Now, in terms of spectrum harmonization, as many of the regulators are now taking a look at what this was agreed to at the overall regional level, some of the regulators are finding that this particular ban plan is a little difficult to implement within their countries. So there's ongoing studies and discussions that are happening now about this ban plan. Now, the actual clearing of this band of the TV broadcasters is still ongoing. This ban plan, or any offshoot of it within each country, probably won't happen until somewhere around the 2013 to 2015 timeframe, depending upon the countries.
Right.
All right. A lot of it will also depend on how fast they can clear the broadcasters out, and then be able to then recover this spectrum and be able to then redeploy it out. Everybody has been watching within the Asia Pacific region. Everybody's been watching both Europe and the U.S. For where the Europeans and the Americans are going with regards to their mobile broadband as well. But for the U.S., as you probably already are aware, the U.S. has already did their digital dividend, and they've already done the auction since 2008 to all the IMT, to all the commercial carriers. But just recently, in late February, President Obama had recently signed into law that actually gives PPDR in the United States 2 times 10 megahertz. So they actually have a full 20 megahertz worth of bandwidth within the digital dividend for public safety. Correct. And that's actually being debated and talked about and intensively studied today by all the regulators. All of the public telecom operators are also involved in many of the studies, as well as organizations such as Motorola, who's trying to help protect the PPDR users from interference. Now, this ban plan that Asia has developed is significantly different than the United States ban plan. So in terms of global harmonization, it's not quite there, because the Asia Pacific ban plan is very different than the US ban plan.
What drives public safety to have harmonization is understanding that their market segment is a niche segment. So the bigger such a niche market can be, the better it is for them, for competition and innovation and so on. And that's what drives the users in public safety to have harmonization. I mean, from a European perspective and a global perspective, the drive of interoperability, so that you within a country can have all the services talking together. That's what Tetra has delivered for mission critical voice. That has really connects very well with the future. That's what they want in the future as well. And in order to have that, you need to have a common standard, which is for broadband LTE and spectrum. And this is also what out of Europe has been driving politically the agenda. Europe have just also in months of March adopted a new policy program called the Radio Spectrum Policy Program, which is adopted by the 27 countries of the European Union, in which PPDR for the first time is recognized as a sector that needs broadband spectrum. So that policy program, together with the fact that the World Radio Conference now in February this year agreed that at the next one, PPDR broadband will be on the agenda for global harmonization. And the fact that it is on the agenda for 2015 is purely a result of Asia. That drive came from Asia. When we then park that a little and then look at what else happened at the World Radio Conference in 2012, was that the countries in Africa and Middle East said, well, it's very good that Europe got their first digital dividend from 790 to 864. That doesn't help us a lot because that didn't give us a digital dividend. We also need a digital dividend. And they pushed the agenda to say that they want a digital dividend 694 to 790, and already from 2015. Which means that now we suddenly have a situation that the US have a digital dividend in 700, where PPDR is. Asia has a band plan in 700, where there is room for PPDR. And Europe has a potential for a second digital dividend from 2015. Europe is the wrong word. Middle East, Africa. Europe, it will happen in Europe as well, but not in 2015. And that there is this political drive to recognize that public safety needs dedicated spectrum. And why does public safety need dedicated spectrum? They need it because there's no way that you, on the basis of commercial decisions, can build the quality and the coverage that emergency services require. In day-to-day situations, they are extremely happy to use commercial services, but they also know that when trouble hits, they need to have total control over their own destiny. For example, London in August had the big riots, and the police moved 16,000 officers in from elsewhere in the UK into London to do that. And suddenly the network, Tetra network of course, had to accommodate all these people coming in and doing the work, and it did that without any issues, and the police were extremely pleased with the service. That is what you can do when you have within a country this kind of networks, one network on agreed frequencies, and this is what all the countries in Europe have done, and that's what they want to continue going forward. Well, Europe and US has gone two different ways.
Okay.
In the US, multiple spectrums, VHF, UHF, 700, 800, analog, digital, trunk, conventional, and that has developed products that were capable of doing that. Multi-band, multi-capability, and I mean the Motorola product is the APX. In Europe, it developed differently. In Europe, we had the fortune that we could get new spectrum to build the Tetra networks on. So there, we didn't have the need to do multi-band, multi-capability terminals. We have one Tetra radio that covers the needs of all the countries.
We're using one band.
We're using one band.
That's right.
And then you could build one network in each country that did all the police, all the fire, all the ambulance, and their partners that they needed to do. So it has gone two different ways.
Right.
And it also means that because that idea developed into Asia, You have Hong Kong, you have Singapore, you have China, have all adopted that TETRA idea. Many of them in 380, 400, which is the European frequency band, but also in 800 megahertz, but following the same concept that many organizations can be on one government radio network controlled by the government. And that's what they want to do with broadband as well. Then the big question is, when can we get mission critical voice on broadband, so that there in the future will be one network only? And that is not that easy, because LTE, the way it has been developed in the standards world, is obviously aimed at commercial services. And commercial services is data, it's voice over IP, but it is still one-to-one communication. Whereas when we are talking about mission critical voice, the needs of public safety is, we need to cater for when the network is down. So the devices needs to be able to talk to each other directly, which is not today in the standard, so we need to change that in the standard, and the work is undergoing. But it is also group call capability, so that you can, from one radio, talk to 100 or 1,000 others and deliver the same message to everybody, so everybody is informed about the same thing. That is true for voice as we have it today on TETRA, but it will also be true on video. That a control room can capture a certain clip from a fixed camera, can be in public or in a bank where a robbery happens, and stream that out as a group video push to the people in the field. Here's a view of exactly what happens. Everybody knows precisely what it is, and they can act in the field accordingly. Mm-hmm. There's also another difference between commercial traffic and public safety traffic. Commercial traffic, it is very much download. You do internet browsing, you view what's in the cloud, and you pull it down. Public safety, it's the opposite direction. It is what you collect in the field, and you send back to the control room for analysis and collection and then briefing back out. So it is much more uplink than it is downlink. The German Ministry of Interior did an analysis of what their users' needs were in the future, which were then translated into spectrum needs and so on, and they came to the conclusion that in the future on broadband they actually needed 15 megahertz uplink capability and 10 megahertz downlink, where in the commercial world it's probably completely opposite. Mm-hmm. So there is differences between the commercial world and the professional world. Other differences are that it has to be up 99.999% of the time, and the last 0.0001 the devices have to talk to each other without a network. Mm-hmm. And there's no way that you on a commercial basis can build that kind of reliability into a network and still make money. And for that reason, governments are convinced that they need, at least for their essential services, they need to have that kind of capability. And another angle to spectrum is that when we deploy commercial networks, it is wireless internet. Internet is perfect, but we also know that internet is best effort service, which is not what governments need. They need to have a much better control over their service. And internet is susceptible to denial of service, hacking, and all of that. Where when you build a dedicated network on your own frequencies, you basically build a wireless intranet, where you have control over everything, and you can manage the data traffic yourself. The team working, the group calling that we have on voice today, that's what is needed on data as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And you talked about Tetra, and I happen to sit on the board of the Tetra Association, so I'm very much involved in the drive that we from Tetra have to the future. We have just changed the organization, so it's now Tetra and Critical Communication Association too, because the vision that we have is that the good ideas that were developed over the years of having one infrastructure for public safety actually probably needs to take a step further. Because Tetra has a future in broadband. GSMR is looking at broadband future. The utilities are looking at broadband futures, smart metering and so on. And there's no way that all of those sectors all can get their own dedicated spectrum broadband. There's not enough spectrum available. So it would make very much common sense if those sectors came together. What do they have in common? Well, they all deliver essential services to society. You can argue that electricity delivery supply is as essential as public safety. Because if we don't have electricity, and when electricity happens to go down, society is really at a mess. So if you could make the broadband future to cover electricity, water, gas, public transportation, public safety on one government-controlled broadband network, intranet as I talked about, that would make very much common sense. And that's what we are trying to do now with the Tetra and Critical Communication Association. We are connecting well with the UIC, which is the railroad organizations in Paris, to see if we can come together and advocate one common government radio network for broadband use. The railroads know that they will have to go somewhere, because when we're talking about spectrum, they are in 900 megahertz. The vision is from the operators that will be used for broadband as well, for LTE also. And when you then put LTE next to GSMR, you have interference. So there will be some issues that will have to be sorted out there as well. There's very good opening cooperation between those sectors, and we can only hope that we will succeed with that. It will take years to come, but that's the vision. That's why we are here.
And you got to talk.
Yeah, in the U.S., right now, the U.S. Public safety organizations already understand that LTE is really a data standard today. So in the U.S., the public safety organizations have pretty much determined what they're going to do is do a two-system overlay. Two systems operating in parallel, where they have ubiquitous coverage using one standard. And in the US, it happens to be APCO P25.
Right.
So they'll be using that across the several different frequency bands, but at least it's one digital radio standard. An overlay on top of that will actually be the private LTE system that they will then use solely as a high-speed data network. And there, they don't even need to deploy it everywhere. They don't need exactly the same footprint as like the P25 digital radio coverage for voice. They really only will deploy the private LTE system mostly for high-speed data or streaming video, only in really the strategic areas that they need it in. For example, they'll put it around areas where there's high crime or high population or strategic assets that they really need to make sure that they have good monitoring over. So those are the types of areas where they'll make strategic investments for coverage. They won't put it out in the farmland or in the rural areas, but they'll still have voice in those areas in order to be able to maintain at least some level of coverage. So public safety will still be able to do their job.
Plus, the idea is to team up with the commercial operators, so that they can roam. I mean, this is the first device that we have launched in the U.S., which does the private LTE. It's unfortunately the battery's down.
Yeah.
It does private LTE. It does public LTE. it does EVDO, it does Wi-Fi, so you can roam from a private network to a commercial network, and because I mean it's all IP, so you just connect to your servers via that.
The answer is yes. They, the majority of them are also understanding today that LTE isn't going to be able to give them the mission-critical voice group call functionality. They've come to the same conclusion that many of the U.S. public safety organizations have, that they will have to maintain their mission-critical two-way radio voice systems, and then putting a private LTE overlay system on top of that in order to be able to do the streaming video that they've all wanted. So they'll also be maintaining that. And really, it's a matter of evolving the LTE standard to one day maybe being able to carry a lot of those functions that are used in the narrowband two-way radio systems today. So until we get there, they're going to maintain this two overlay idea for quite some time.
Well, as you know, 3GPP is the operators, and
Right.
the US with the funding to build their broadband network. Part of that funding is being used for people to help modify the 3GPP standard. Okay. So NIPSTIC in the US is having funding to actually do that, and the Tetra Association is supporting that 100%. We actually have a meeting joint with the NIPSTIC people and Tetra Association on the 23rd of April in Amsterdam to take that further.
Right. So it is being worked on by 3GPP, and what it really involves is public safety people getting involved in the standards development process within the 3GPP process.
Okay.
But that is not easy, because that is heavy investment for organizations to participate in that.
Yeah.
Real heavy investment.